Hey guys, welcome back to the Message Recap Podcast right here at Transformation Church. And Justin's not here with us today. He's President's Day. He took the day off. I'm just kidding. No, he's at meetings downtown. But we wanted to make sure we got on the podcast. And so I talked to Justin. I was like, man, let's get Pastor Rick and Pastor Dan on the podcast. And so introducing my first co-host, Pastor Dan Livingston, founding pastor at TC. So
good to be here.
Hey,
awesome.
Hey. And then we got Pastor Rick Rodriguez. Requez. And then, as always, heard not seen, John Sapp.
You're welcome.
So coming off a great Sunday. Yeah, Sunday was a good day, man.
Powerful day.
We just so many things to celebrate right now. It's been really, really good, and Rick oversees all of our teams and groups and all that stuff, and set a record for next steps this month.
Yeah, we did.
Awesome.
It's totally insane.
Insane. So. We how many people we finished? Technically, we had 29 complete yesterday, but we had 36. Is that
right? Yeah, 36 total the first week. And then we had 29 people complete next steps total yesterday.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Which is really crazy.
Yeah.
So that room was just extremely packed out. But what's just good is just there are so many people falling in love with what we do as a church. Mm-hmm. And more you just hear people talk about it's just the vibe. Yeah. It's the atmosphere that you guys are creating here. We had a leader pull me aside last week and just said, hey man, listen, tell the whole staff, y'all just keep doing what you're doing because apparently it's working, and man, people's lives are being changed. So
love that. Neat. Love that. Yeah.
It's amazing because I remember when we first started it.
Yeah.
And we when we learned the whole thing with Grow Track, what we call now Next Steps, and long story short, when we started it, we took our staff through it first, if you remember, Pastor Brad, and then we took our leaders through it. And then we took our whole congregation through it. And that's when we were running, 150, 200 people in that ballpark. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it was great. It was packed out, and we had refreshments and food. And then the first month we did it, when it was just new people, it was like 2, 1, none, And I felt like we were totally just blowing it, just totally, missing it.
Right.
And so Church of the Highlands did a Saturday where they just did training on Grow Track. So we took off up there, and I'm feeling like a total failure. And we get in there, and one of the leaders talked to me, and they kept that down to 20 people or less. And so he is, what's going on? I'm telling him, I'm like, it was great for the first 3 months. Now it's like disaster. Nobody, we might have one, we might have two. And he starts talking, and then he sets in the meeting. He's called me out. I didn't know he was going to do it. And he says, let's use Pastor Dan. He just gave us some statistics. They're having like 1, 2. And he said, tell us how many you run in your church. And I said, use 150, 200 on a really good Sunday. And so he started giving statistics that if you have 1% of your attendance in Grow Track, you're doing really well. So if you have 200 people and you have 2, you're doing really good. He said, if you have 2%, you're knocking it out of the water.
Yeah.
And he said, if you have 3%, your church is going to totally explode. And I'm like, I still don't get those numbers. And then he said, I'm saying this because we're watching that fruit now.
Right.
He said, every person that comes into your church goes through Grow Track, what we call Next Steps, and they get engaged, will bring an average of 10 new people to your church their first year. And he said, so if you have a church of 200, let's go midway and go two, each time you have 2 a month that goes through it. Well, that's 24 people times 10. Anything wrong with growing 240 people in your first year? And we're watching that, the fruit of that now. When you start talking having 30, 40 people in Next Steps, we're seeing the fruit of people going out, finding a totally new relationship with Jesus, and growing in the Word, getting in small groups, life change happening, telling their friends, bringing their friends, and we're watching the cycle repeat itself now. It's awesome.
There was a girl yesterday. She was so upset because she's here in Pensacola. She leaves I think April to go back to where she's man, she's here on business.
Oh yeah.
And she was so upset because where she wants to work or serve for her, she's like, I want to serve in the children's ministries, but I know there's a process to do that. And by the time I get acclimated to the kids, I'm already leaving.
Yeah.
So she was like almost in tears. Like, but she goes, so, I have to move away. And I go, why don't you just move back to Pensacola? And she goes, I've thought about it. Like, I'm really thinking about moving to this place because of this church. And I'm like, come on, girl, let's go. So
No, I know of 2 families that have visited that have told us they're moving back to Pensacola from visiting from other states, so that they can be a part of the church.
Come on. That's awesome.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
Humbling, extremely humbling.
Extremely humbling. Yeah. It's crazy. It's a crazy journey, that we're just on right now. We're riding the wave, and
put it in perspective. I love what you said, Pastor Brad, in a staff meeting recently, and I've used it talking to other people, even with the revivals that are breaking out across our nation right now, is that you said to the staff a couple of weeks ago, we're not doing anything different than we've done for the last 4 years.
Right.
It's just God showed up in a supernatural, sovereign way and has graced us that we didn't do anything to cause this or earn it.
Right.
And we're watching God do that. Even at Asbury, the guy got up and preached a normal message and the kids were in a normal worship service, and then God showed up in a supernatural way. And nobody did anything to cause God. We can't get that good enough.
Yeah.
We can never do anything to earn that. It's just a visitation of God that we're very grateful for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just one of those unique situations, unique seasons. And we're doing the same thing we've always done. We're doing it pretty much the same way we've always done it. I think we've tightened some screws for sure. Like we always look for, what we call the lowest slot on the bucket, right? Where is the area in our church? We always know there's 28 areas of improvement. What's the one area that if we fix that, it would make the most significant difference? And we're constantly doing that. That never changes. And I think that just speaks to, that's a testament to what we are seeing as we just continue to, but it's just the process and being super content with the process, being super content with the journey and knowing we're not going to fix everything at one time, but we're just going to keep on being faithful, and same thing we talk to leaders about, it's just that a lot of times we think fruitfulness leads to faithfulness. If God would let me be fruitful, I would be faithful with what he's given me. But faithfulness leads to fruitfulness.
Right.
You be faithful with what you've got, and then God will trust you with more. But we always want to say, God, give it to me, and I promise I'll be faithful. But God looks at patterns, not potential, right? Like we were talking about in relationships the other day. It's like, so we be faithful, and he makes us fruitful, as opposed to praying that he'll let us be fruitful, and then all of a sudden we're going to magically become faithful. It's like people that say, God, if you let me win the lottery, I'll promise I'll tithe. It's like, you ain't tithing now. So if you won't tithe with $1,000, you're not going to tithe with 36 million. So, you start doing that math, it's like 3.6 million, it's like, no, if you can't tithe with $100, you ain't tithing 3.6. So it's just the idea of like being faithful, and we've been faithful. But I also know too, while we're kind of just on the subject too, is, we've constantly told our leaders, and I think you've heard me say this, because you when you first got here, is me, you, and leaders. That was all it was for the first 4 months, and one of the things we constantly said is like, God won't send you more than you're prepared to handle. Right. And it's like, and I think part of this too is just a testament to you, Rick, in your presence here at TC, which was like, we never had 30 something people in Next Steps before you got here, but ever since you put your hands on that steering wheel, now God's sending in, you know what I'm saying? He's sending a harvest through the doors now. Well, why? Because we have a leader in there, that's prepared to facilitate and has built an amazing team. Your wife also helps lead that. And now you guys are able to facilitate the number of people that God wants to bring through it. And so, God, a lot of times we want God to just open up the doors and flood us with people. And it's like, well, if he sends you, if your limit is 10 and he sends you 20, you're going to fail all 20 trying to serve them when your limit was 10. Right. And now we're in a season where, we have the right leaders in the right seats to be able to facilitate a harvest. And that's why I think God is just doing what he's doing. It's like, we always wanted it. We had to put ourselves in the right position and put the right people in the right seats to have it, and so I think that's also a testament to, leadership. And so it's really, really good. So, and we keep preaching on ridiculous series,
Provocative series,
Sushi, sex, and subtitles. Yeah. Which, by the way, people have asked, and I wanted to give them an answer. Pastor Dan is going to be closing out the series for us.
Let's go.
So in 2 Sundays, not this Sunday, but the next.
Right.
And so my guy, he's preaching. Do you ever think you would preach in a series called Sushi, Sex, and Subtitles in all your years of pastoring?
Probably not. We didn't have sushi back then.
Y'all weren't eating sushi in Lakeland, Florida, and Winter Haven,
I
Florida.
just got
Polk County
introduced
sushi?
to the sushi life by my son and daughter-in-law. You know,
No, yeah, it's super provocative. So, I mean, we have a pastor friend, Pastor Scott, down in Lakeland, Free Life Chapel. Amazing. He's one of our overseers. Absolute gangster of a pastor, but super provocative.
oh yeah.
He's super provocative. And I remember hearing, different sermon series he would go through, 10 years ago and being like, whew. But now it's like, we're getting closer and closer to that line. I'm like, well, here we are. So, maybe one of his will show up in the future for us. So
Never know.
but yeah, maybe I'll break that out. 2024 might be the year, John. We break out one of those series.
I've just been waiting for it.
Yeah.
So
John knows John hears all my series ideas, and sometimes he just looks at me and is like, "You sure you're gonna do that?"
Run them by the Father first.
So
right.
it's like maybe we can come up with a better series.
I live with his mom. Please run them by me first.
Yeah, right.
I feel like mom would be the loose cannon. She'd be like, "That's right, you call it whatever."
That's probably right.
But yeah, no, it's been a good series. This past Sunday we talked about communication, and we kind of titled it, "This is how we do it," and how we have healthy relationships, how we have healthy marriages, is communication. And if everything in the business world rises and falls on leadership, I think everything in marriages rises and falls on communication. I talked to a number of couples in the lobby after the message at each service, the 8:30, the 10, and the 11:30. And most of the people that I talked to a lot of young people, and they're like, "Thank you so much. It's super helpful." And it's like, yeah, absolutely. You can see how it was helpful for young couples. But it was so interesting, the number of older 40s, older 50s, and some even in their 60s that were like, I needed to hear that. And it's like, because I think communication is one of those things that it doesn't matter how long you've been married, you go through ebbs and flows of being good at it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's like you go through seasons where your communication's great, and then you go through seasons where you got to have that sit down again and say, "Hey, listen, we're missing it. Something's missing."
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know you guys, how many years?
17.
17.
42.
42. So talk me, I'll let both of you guys kind of share, but Rick, what is the 17 years of marriage? How have you seen that ebb and flow of communication, good seasons, not so good seasons show up, and how have you guys navigated that personally?
Man, this Sunday was such a good message. Really, really good. And one of the things that we've learned as a couple that we've had to navigate what is communication because of our personality. We are completely, totally different personality traits. And so if you know the DISC profile, she's a DC and I'm an IS. And so she's hardcore, no fluff, no nothing. I'm like, hey, I love people and all this other stuff. And so when I communicate, I like to tell stories. I like to give all these illustrations and things like that. And my wife is just like, cut to the chase. I don't need no fluff. Tell me what's the facts. I don't need any opinions. And that's it. And so, so that's really what we've had to learn in our communication. But for me, one of the things that I struggle with the most in our communication is I'm very sarcastic. But I do it out of like humor but also love as well. So when you made the comment, your conversations could either help or hurt, right? You're like, is this helpful or is it hurtful? And so even Saturday, Tiffany we're walking through and I'm like, yo, girl, you losing weight. It's going great. She's like, yeah, I've lost like 12 pounds and that's awesome. I go, first 10's water weight. And I just out of nowhere, she gave me this look. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I was just, I'm being dumb, sarcastic, And so it's just, so I'm always having to keep in back of my mind is what I'm about to say helpful or is it going to be hurtful?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, if it's not helpful, it's going to be hurtful.
That's right.
And when I'm talking to her or even my children too. So we've had to always keep our thumb on the pulse, our finger on the pulse of our relationship when it comes to our communication style. Mm-hmm. And so is it helpful or is it hurtful? So it's been killer.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's, you don't really have relationships with people that your presence is indifferent.
Yeah.
And that was one thing I was trying to communicate in a number of different ways on Sunday is like, you're not really, every connection you have with a person, you're either the person they want to answer the phone for or the person they want to ignore.
Right.
And that's how you communicate with them, so it's like the helpful or hurtful. It's some of the language you use is like you're either healing or you're hurting.
Yeah.
In all your interactions, you're either healing or you're hurting. You're either the person that's helping them move towards who God wants them to be, or you're a person that you're probably building a wall between them and who God wants them to, like, right. And being intentional about that. But, watching you and Mom for the last 35 years, I've seen you guys communicate well. Extremely well, and I think you guys have had great communication, but it wasn't until I got older that you started giving me insight into even ways that you and like Mom have struggled in the past. And then some things you kind of put into practice in your marriage that kept those communication doors open, and not just open, but I think intentional. Whereas like, we're going to make sure that the last 40 years are better than the first 40 years type of thing. Like, so what does that look like for you and Mom?
Well, she grew up in a home that was touchy-touchy, kissy-kissy, lovey-lovey. I grew up in a home where I didn't see we knew Dad loved Mom, and you respected her to the hilt, but I never saw my dad hold my mom's hand. I never heard him say, I love you. He never told us he loved us until he had brain surgery, and then when my dad came out of brain surgery, it was, I love you. And, we watch him getting affectionate with our mom, and we're like, don't. Stop,
no.
No, don't get a room, what I'm saying? Yeah. And then when he'd call on the phone, before hanging up, he'd go, I love you, son. And I didn't know how to react. We knew he loved us, but he didn't know how to affectionately show us. So I went into a marriage of a woman that was used to it, and I didn't know how to give it. And so I had to let her teach me and really be open to learn. Wow. And it had to become something intentional or I wouldn't do it. And it took a while, it took years. We get married 3 weeks later, we're in the South Bronx, New York, and blasting full-time ministry, just blasting away, and so I had to really become intentional of that time. And to make it short, and Rick's heard me mention this to him, and I talked to when we talked to our team, we've talked to all of them about this. I think one of the keys that has really helped our communication is we call it our 20-minute window. And that's each day we're going to create, we have a time that we call our 20-minute window that we talk us. Mm-hmm. We don't talk our kids. We love them. We don't talk our grandkids, love them. We don't talk ministry. We didn't talk church. We talked us. How are we doing? What's our date night going to look like Friday night? Where are we going on vacation in the summer? What's our week look like? Yeah. So and we talk us. But we both know during that week, both of us are going to have the opportunity that I'm going to ask her, not every day. Well, that could be rough on a marriage, but once a week, I'm going to ask her, what am I doing good? And where can I do better? Yeah. And she knows that question is going to come to me also. And we give each other a safe place that we can bring up a negative, and it's not an attack. Yeah. And, I'm working on some books. Now we're doing podcasts. And so I have my iPad right next to me, on the love seat. And this was months ago, because she's always on the other side of the love seat. In the evening time, that's our time. We put our phone down. And just a thought hit me. And so I grabbed my iPad and I'm doing this, and I noticed she got up and went and laid down on the sofa, and I got through with my thought and I put her down. And I said, why'd you go over there? And she said, I don't want to share you with your girlfriend. And my iPad, she calls my girlfriend, and so I'm with her all the time, and, but it was that, but that gave a safe place, that we've always given each other intentionally. We set that's what we call our 20-minute window aside to just talk us, talk life, talk where we want to be, where we want to be 5 years from now, and we give each other that window to say, here's what you could do better. You're falling back into a rut or a routine that wasn't healthy, or, but here's what you're doing good. You wash the dishes for me. Thank you for doing that. Or, and so that's created an intentional place for us to talk.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good. One of the things you kind of ingrained into me early on in my marriage was a phrase, and I teach it every time I do premarital counseling now with young couples in our church. And one of the things I tell them constantly is the same thing you told me when I got married, which is like, start how you want to finish. So if you want to finish, if at the end of your marriage, you want to be having date nights and you want to be prioritizing, and you want to be having conversation, and you want to be having all those things, you start your marriage that way so that you'll end it that way. Because for so many people, I think it's like, well, when we get through this season, then and it's like, but there's always another one of those seasons, dude. It's like when it's not this season, it's like church world, what I mean? It's like when it's not Easter, it's, reframe. When it's not reframe, it's Christmas. When it's not, it's like, there's always something else around the corner, when it's not your degree that you're trying to get, it's your, the first job. When it's not the first job, it's furthering the career. When it's not that, it's the kids. When it's once you have the kids and it's getting the kids in school, then it's them getting their degree. Then it's like, dude, that just never stops. And so you have to, one of the things you always taught me is like, you just have to prioritize, start how you want to finish. So you make it a priority. This is what we're going to do, and we're not going to apologize for it. And I think one of the things that you really helped me out with, I know, and I think you probably helped the whole staff out with, since you're, over the leadership development component for them and health for our whole staff, is being unapologetic for that. I think you have admitted, I didn't necessarily see it, but you have admitted the ways in which you let ministry take priority over marriage. And I think for people that's listening, and maybe it's not ministry, maybe it is, but maybe it's not ministry, maybe it's business or school or even kids or whatever, how those things can take priority over your marriage, and how you have to put other than your relationship with the Lord, your marriage is the most important thing.
Yeah. I did not at first. And, thankfully, my pastor in New York pulled me aside and said, you're doing a great job. You're winning so many people to Jesus. You're mentoring and all this, and you're going to lose your marriage in the process. And he sat me down, and this is the guy I'm working for. Yeah. And he said, you're here too much, and he sat me down and helped me establish boundaries. And from that day on, I'm not going to say I did it all right. Yeah. But we really, when we had our children, you guys, and Natalie, it wasn't a week later, we're back on Friday night date. Somebody's got watching our baby, That's right. World doesn't shut down. She's still my queen. Yeah. And now she can't become just a mom and a housewife. She's still got to be treated like a wife.
So important.
And so I think, us men, when we hear the word communication, we're immediately thinking talk, which we're not good at. Women are great talkers and men are poor listeners. And we have to be honest with that. And, I love
because there's
TD.
So many words.
They talk too much.
I'm opening up with that on my message on that Sunday. I love TD Jake's sermon. He goes, or his saying, he goes, men talking straight lines and women talking circles.
That's right.
It takes them 40 years to do a 11-day journey. And your mom's that way, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but we think it's communications talk, but I've learned in 42 years of marriage, communication is touch. Mm-hmm. Communication is a lot, the flirting, all those things that we do, that when we do talk, they know we're talking out of a deep love for them, not out of a dictatorship or command to them. That even when, we all know that your mom went through a really difficult time, with this mental journey that she went on. Thank God he's brought her back.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for a year and a half, man, we were on a journey of mental health. And in that journey, I made it very intentional, because she didn't know how to receive. And this can kind of, maybe I don't want to cross the line here, but if you're talking sex, sushi, and
I may not want to hear it personally, but I think it's fine for the audience.
But I made a commitment that I would not try to be physical with my wife during that season because I felt like I would be abusing her. that I would literally be molesting her in a season that she didn't understand what physical affection was at
She was
that
fragile.
moment
It's
to that
fragility.
level.
Yeah.
But I made sure that because we built our intimacy and our relationship is start how you want to end.
Yeah.
And you know that we've built our intimacy and our relationship as much on the flirting, the touching, the hugging, the holding hands. That looks good on you. You look really pretty in that. You know, a rub of the arm, things of those things. That's communication that we as men have to really learn, that if we want to end like we want to start like we want to end, is those things are so important. And I know I had to I had to work on being intentional with that, because I can come in and not do any of it because of the way I was raised, but becoming intentional in that. So I think really being intentional on the non-bedroom intimacy is a key to men really being able to communicate with our wife and then wanting to hear what we have to say.
Yeah. That's so good. Because I think, one of the things you said that I think is just so important too, and Rick, I'd love your input on this as well. You said after mom had me and Natalie, it was a week later, you were back to Friday night date nights. And I grew up, there's a lot of couples out there. It's like, well, we can't do date night because we have the kids. And it's like, get a stinking babysitter because your kids need to see you prioritize each other.
Right.
Your kids are going to duplicate the marriage they see.
Yeah.
So if they see that the marriage takes a backseat to everything, they're going to grow up to have a marriage that takes a backseat to everything. And so it's like one of those things where your kids, we have to, parents, you need to raise your kids. You need to let your kids see the type of marriage you want them to have.
Right.
Yeah.
I know yours are 15 now, right?
14, they'll be 15 this year.
Okay. They'll be 15 this year, and I'm curious how you can kind of navigate that. You and Tiff navigate that conversation about, prioritizing each other, so that your kids can, and the kids can see the type of marriage you want them to have versus, leaving up the chance.
Right. So for us, we're kind of unique in a situation that we adopted our kids. They were 7. So the moment that they came into our house, I set precedence then. I was like, hey guys, listen, your mom was first, your mom would be last. So she was here before you, she'll be here after you, because you guys are going to go and do your own life. So she will always be first in my life. It's Jesus, your mama, then you. Yeah. And so we kind of had that talk in the very beginning. And then from there, I'm still not the best at it. Tiffany, when I joined the staff here at TC, I feel like I got a breath of fresh air and I became the leader, or I started to become the leader that I was years ago. I was in a season to where I wasn't believing in myself and different things like that. And so I was kind of lethargical in my leadership. But then when I got here, it was like a breath of fresh air. Now I started hitting the ground running. And Tiffany had to sit me down one day and she goes, we need to have a conversation. And this was during our 20-minute talk, and so she goes, you're turning into old Rick. And I'm like, hold up, what does that mean? Like, and she goes, you love being here. You love Pastor Brad. You love his leadership. You love where the church is going. And so now your ambition is taking over. And so I'm becoming a back seat. And I see that taking place, us and the children. Yeah. And she said, just flat out, she goes, you will be a good husband and you will be a good father. I love this church and I know you love this church, but yet we will not become second and third to the church. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. Got it. 10-4, right. And so then from there, we've had to really prioritize. So for us, what we tried to do is that we do a lunch date every Wednesday is our standalone lunch date. Nice. And then on Sunday evenings, since the kids go to Bible study, then we take that time and we'll go hang out and do a date night there. Yeah. But I try to tell couples now, when we talk about babysitters and stuff like that, I'm like, guys, do me a favor, either pay for a babysitter now, or you may be paying for a divorce lawyer later. That's right. So which one is the cheapest? And I promise you this, that babysitter is going to be cheaper than a divorce lawyer. So,
that's right.
So we establish a routine for us. So Wednesdays are our lunch. And then Friday nights are our family night. And then Sunday nights are our date night.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that's intentionality is what's key. with that. You know, it's like we said it last week, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. You know, it's like you have to trade spontaneity for intentionality. Yeah. You know, it's like if you're anticipating that you're going to use spontaneity and be spontaneous, and that's just going to naturally get where you want it to go. It's like, brother, no ship ever got to the dock on accident. You know what I mean? Like, so if that's how you want that to go, that's not going to go that way. You have to be intentional about it, and so just trying to make sure that it gets that way. And that's what, you know. And I think even for all of us, I think ministry is even harder because it's easy to say what I do for the church is what I do for the Lord.
Right.
And to try to, and to unintentionally let the priority creep to the top where the church becomes first and your family becomes second because God is first. And it's like, yeah, God is, your relationship with God is first, but what you're doing for God isn't first. You know, like your relationship with God is first, then your wife, then your kids, then your purpose, you know, like, and that can be your career, serving, whatever, however that works out for you. But, and so those, I think we've all, you know, John's on here too. He's been with us for, man, what are you on? Year 5 right now?
Year 5
Woo! With us too.
Wild.
And I think him and Savannah, you guys have found your own ebb and flow with your cadence and your job.
Yeah, no, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Like it was extremely difficult, actually. Like you have to be really intentional about making sure that there are times where you're spending together and there are times where you're working.
Yeah.
Right. And, not that you asked or I'm, going into like a lot of detail, but we've been married for 12 years and there have been times, especially in the last 2 years, that I have to see her and know that she's changing constantly.
Yeah.
You know, and like I have to acknowledge it. I have to say, all right, well, is this who you are now? And if it is, I want to still love every part that you are, but I have to make those moments intentional. And if you mix in work and everything else, it's like if you let that go too long, then you're nowhere near where you need to be in your marriage again. And so, it's being intentional about all of that is difficult. Yeah. But it's like y'all were saying, it's best in the long run. So
to make those priorities. Yeah. It's so funny. After the message from 2 weeks ago, I was talking with Robbie, and one of the things me and him were talking about is like, it's so interesting because we were talking about how men have to learn to love the women that their wives are becoming.
Right.
And he said a phrase that kind of like set an emotional thought for me. I was like, man, that's so true. Because husbands have to learn to love the women that their wives are becoming. And wives have to learn to love the men that their husbands will always be.
Wow.
So every woman goes into a marriage thinking she's going to change her man, and that dude is going to be the same for the next 50 years. He is not changing. And every husband who marries a wife he thinks is always going to stay the same, and she's changing for the next 50 years. She's not going to be the same. And so that duality of expecting one to change that never will, and expecting one to stay the same that never will. And so having to like wrestle out that conversation that's probably going to show up this coming up Sunday in a conversation, in some of the message portions. But so it's just so interesting to me that that's the reality we have to deal with. And because the reason I say that, this past Sunday, we talked about, a number of different things, and we want to encourage you guys to go back and check out the message. But at the end of the day, we talked about how everyone has a distorted reality that they view life through. And because of that, communication can just be hard. And so we hit on a number of things, different ways that people are, they're dealing with insecurities, they're dealing with, isolation, they're dealing with damage, baggage, and all of those impact how we see our relationship. All of those impact how we see our marriage, and they all impact how we interact with our marriage, with our spouses. And so because of those things, we truly do have to get very intentional with how we communicate. And when we wrapped up the sermon, one of the things we really tried to bring it home to was this idea of healing, where, we can use our words, the tongue holds the the power of life and death. Right. And so, we can speak life, we can speak death, and that we just need to get intentional about healing the environments that we're in and speaking life and using communication to understand our spouse's needs, to see through their lens, to forgive, and communication helps all of those things be possible. But just like we said earlier, no ship ends up at the dock on accident. Right. You have to drive it that way. You have to, direct it that way. You have to steer it that way. And communication is the rudder of relationships. So how you communicate is going to dictate the journey that you go on. And if you have no communication, then you have no rudder, which means the seas and the storms and the winds are the only thing driving your ship. And man, can you imagine having a marriage where nothing but the storms are dictating its direction? What a disaster. So we want to encourage everybody out there, be intentional about communication, be intentional about your marriages, be intentional about your relationships, and be intentional about cultivating healing in your conversations. Because when you give people the ability to heal, you also are driving intimacy as well, because those connections are so important. So shout out to Pastor Dan being on the podcast. Thanks for coming. Great to be here. Appreciate it. Pastor Rick.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
John, as always. And so thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you want more information about the church, you can go to transformationchurch.com. You can also go check us out on social media, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, whatever else.
Run the gambit.
At Transformation Pensacola. And so you can check out all the stuff that's popping off and happening. We got some cool things coming up as we get ready to wrap up the last 2 weeks of Sushi, Sex, and Subtitles. There may or may not be. Can't make any promises because I'm still trying to lock this down now. There may be a special guest joining me in the message on Sunday. We'll have to see what happens with that. So that's all I can give you. Ooh. We'll catch you guys next week for another message, another week, another sermon, another recap podcast. Later.